Hi everyone, I'm Reverend Carissa and I'm here with your Wednesday Word, and today I want to talk to you about an extra hidden figure found in Scripture. Now this whole month of May we're talking about the hidden figures of Scripture, women of valor who changed the world. And we're going to be talking about some of the most well-known women, but also their hidden stories on Sundays. And today I want to add another woman to that cast of characters. Today I want to tell you about Hagar. Now you probably know about Abraham. Father Abraham had many sons had Father Abraham, although he actually only had two. But Abraham was married to a woman named Sarah, and for many, many years Sarah could not conceive a son. But they had been promised by God that Abraham would have many descendants, so many that they would rival the number of stars in the sky. And so Sarah decided to take her things into her own hands and to make sure that Abraham had children. And so Sarah decided to give her servant woman Hagar to her husband to be a surrogate mother, to have a child of Abraham. Now this was common practice in those days, but it also is still not it's still a horrific practice to take someone who is already enslaved and to force them to be a surrogate mother for you when they have no control over the situation. But that's where Hagar finds herself in the story of Scripture. Hagar was an Egyptian woman who became a slave of Sarah and Abraham, and then became mother of Abraham's first child, Ishmael. But Hagar's story is also bigger than that. Hagar's story includes also encounters with God in a personal way in the midst of the hardest moments of her life. I want to read to you this beautiful first-person narrative reflection about Hagar that comes from Rachel Held Evans' book, Inspired. And she talks from the perspective of Hagar about how Hagar has the unique experience of being the only one in Scripture to name God. Let's meet Hagar. Most of the time, God does the naming. Abraham, Isaac, Israel. Just one person in all your sacred Scripture dared to name God. And it wasn't a priest or a prophet or a warrior or a king. It was I, Hagar, foreigner, woman, and slave. I do not wish to be remembered as powerless, for power is the currency of men. But before the wilderness, before the naming, my station ranked me among the invisible. Dark skin and a foreign tongue curried little favor in Beersheba, the land of seven wells, where warring tribes marked moments of peace by digging together for water. I belonged to a woman blessed with all the things a woman wants. She had wealth, nobility, legendary beauty, divine favor, but not the thing that a woman in unsettled territory needs: a womb that can carry a boy. Sarah wore her laugh lines like jewelry. She told stories better than anyone I've ever known. The desert wind sent her white hair dancing and carried her unmistakable peals of laughter through the arid atmosphere like rain. Old and young, men and women, slave and free, ventured to her tent for advice on breeding goats and arranging marriages and spicing foods and offering prayers. And yet in our world, they called this woman barren. I had the misfortune to belong to a woman who believed the wrong name. So she gave my body to Abraham. Long as I live, I will never forget how casually she informed me of my duty, rattled off at the end of a list of linens to gather, prepare food. And you will think me callous for not being more angry, more resistant to the charge before me, but bearing the child of a tribal leader, even another woman's name, carried with it the possibility of more freedom, or at least a challenge to my expendability. The moment the old man rolled away from me, and he never once looked me in the eye, I begged the gods of Egypt for a boy. If I survived the birth, I might even live to see him marry. Oh, I begged the gods in every language I knew. Babies' movements don't begin with kicks, but as subtle, enigmatic flutters. They don't tell you that. So I doubted right until the morning when, lying on my side after another fitful night of dreams, I placed my hands on my belly and felt the sudden, certain impression of a heel. No woman can prepare for the awe of it, the overwhelming surge of joy and fear. Instinctively, I looked around for someone to tell, but there's no one there, of course. And then came a second nudge, this one longer and firmer, as if to say, don't you dare think of yourself as alone, Mama. We're in this world together. My baby had yet to take a breath of air, and already we shared a secret. That must have been the moment I started singing little fractures of the lullabies I remembered from my mother, a woman whose skin, I think, smelled of saffron, and whose voice, I think, was soft and deep as a dove's. The memories of slaves are dappled ones. Perhaps I sang too loudly. Perhaps I carried myself with more confidence than before. Your scribes will say that I grew contemptuous of my mistress, but your scribes never asked for my view of it. The only thing I know is that for every day that my belly grew rounder, Sarah's spirit grew stormier, a wind-assailed reed about to break. A slave expects harsh words and withheld rations, but the physical abuse surprised me. Taunts turned to slaps, barked orders to mule whips on the back. I would not have fled if she had not threatened the baby's life. I want you to know that. I would not have taken the risk of running into the desert in the dead of night with only a jug of water and some stolen bread to sustain me had I not feared the worst. But Abraham did nothing, of course, and my mute idols even less. Did they even notice? Could they even see? Your scribes will remember this as a silly woman's spat, an anecdote to explain how this cursed land grew populated, but your scribes never carried a baby in the desert. Your scribes never knew the singular desperation of counting the hours from the last assuring kick. I took the road to shore, the closest thing I knew to home. But as the sun rose like the great unseeing eye over the 5th or 6th mile and the weight on my pelvis numbed my legs, I collapsed into the dust. Water gone, food regurgitated, blood streaking down my thighs. I waited there to die or deliver or both. Who will find my body, I wondered, and what story will they tell of it? And then, on the rippling horizon, a well. I crawled to it, I plunged my face in the waters, and I think I must have fainted there or slept. All I know is that I opened my eyes, and a stranger stood beside me. A presence neither male nor female, neither Egyptian nor Hebrew, neither safe nor threatening, and in a voice that sounded like my mother's, spoke and said, Hagar, slave of Sarah, where have you come from, and where are you going? The stranger knew my name. I am fleeing from my mistress, I answered. What could I say about where I was going? Go back to Sarah, the stranger said, but do not be afraid. Not only will this child live, but through him I will give you a whole nation of descendants, grandchildren and great-grandchildren too numerous to count. I cannot tell you why, but immediately I believed. This stranger, with the voice of a dove, spoke with the authority of God. Your son will grow into a fighter, God said, a wild donkey of a man, but even as he struggles, he will survive. So call him Ishmael, for it means God hears, and God has heard you in your misery today. In spite of everything, I smiled about the part about the donkey, for already I knew how that boy kicked. Every mother is something of a prophet. And you may think that the prophecy of struggle and strife would dishearten a pregnant mother, but a slave does not struggle or strive. A slave only obeys. And if the prophecy was true, this means that my boy Ishmael would be free. With what force I could muster, I rose to face God, the brightness of the sun obscuring both of our faces. I knew it was the God of my mistress, whom she called Yahweh. But if I was to be the mother of a nation, I would need to give this God a new name. You are a God who hears, but also who sees, I said, surprised by the strength in my voice. I have seen the one who sees me. So I named God as I named the well, Elroy, the God who sees. And it was a name remembered. For as your scripture reports, that is why the well was called Bir Laharoi, and it is still there between Kadesh and Bered. Many of my sisters would draw from that well. The Hebrew midwives who defied Pharaoh by delivering babies of slaves, the despised Samaritans who scandalized a town for daring to speak to the Messiah, The young women ripped from their homes in West Africa and shipped like livestock across the sea. The mamas who saw their boys lynched and the grandmas who saw their grandsons gunned down. The millions of black and brown people whose names the world has forgotten, but whose God has never failed to see. The fierce female prophets and preachers who rose from the ashes of their suffering and dared, like me, to survive and name. I too would return to it years later when Sarah banished me to the wilderness, again this time with a little boy clinging to my legs. My faith, like Abraham's, was tested. But my faith, unlike the patriarchs, was not immortalized in Caravaggio's reds or Chagall's blues for later generations to view, nor was it remembered in the litany of Hebrews or in the genealogies of the New Testament. And yet just one person in all your sacred scripture dared to name God. And it wasn't a priest or a prophet or a warrior or a king. It was I, Hagar, foreigner, woman, and slave. Don't you dare forget.